Hello, welcome to the second Insight Dialogue for OCB. Today I'm with Tracy and we're going to be speaking about sustainability. So Tracy, thank you for coming along.
You're very welcome, Simon.
And hopefully we can have a nice chat about sustainability within business and management.
That'd be fantastic. So tell me a bit about your sustainability journey.
Well, my sustainability journey probably started many years ago, late 80s. So I remember the Brundtland report.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when it was just looking about making things last. And even today, I still think of sustainability as something which is making something last. But the ways in which it's moved towards something more akin to meeting goals and targets. Sometimes has perhaps led to problems in greenwashing and ways in which people have used it as a marketing tool as well. And I think that's important looking forward.
I think we also need to be mindful that in the 1980s, that was probably too late for sustainability to become part of the conversation. But that is when it came to the fore, as you rightly say. And a lot of companies, I think it was when we started to see sort of the bins arrive. So the bins arrived with your plastics going here, your cardboard goes in here, and we still have our recycling at home, in our home domestic homes, and all around the world. So for example, we travelled to Malta, and in Malta, when you buy a bottle of water, the plastic bottle has a charge on the top, 10 cents, and you get the 10 cents back when you return the bottle. Something as simple as that has reduced the use of single-use plastics, which is great.
And I think that's really interesting because it does show also that sustainability still tends to evolve as something which is environmental.
Yes.
And when you think about the triple bottom line and trying to balance economic, social and environmental, I think environmental continues to be elevated, probably because green is such an easy sell.
It's an easy sell, but it's also a trendy sell at the minute. Everybody wants to be seen to be green. And I think you were saying earlier about how companies, there's an index, isn't there? Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, once again, I'm probably going back 20 years now, Tracy, but when I first started teaching in this area, it was the case that we had the Financial Times Stock Exchange, where you had the top companies, and they looked at them with profits. And then you got the second sustainability index, and they were completely different companies back then. But if you look at those today, there's a correlation between the stock exchange successful companies and the ones that are sustainable. The question is, what drives what? But I think we've seen over the last few years that there's been a kind of rise in green consumerism. And people are looking not just at how it affects the planet and the environment, but how it also affects local traditions and cultures. So I think, you know, if we went back to the bad old days where globalization was beginning to look towards reducing costs and slave labour and those elements that come in, which have been rightly targeted under the Sustainable Development Goals. But now if we have a look at it, you're seeing that people are beginning to demand that local societies are supported. So we've seen that shift from shareholder return to stakeholder return.
I like that.
And I think that's a real key thing. So profits aren't necessarily just to maximise for the shareholder. It's also to actually make life easier for the stakeholder, particularly at the local level. So seeing Starbucks and companies like that actually investing within the societies in which they work.
Rather than saying they're investing, seeing the action.
Absolutely. So we're linking in and seeing areas now where coffee is being grown, for example, in environmentally sustainable fashion, but also using local resources, local knowledges, and investing within local societies. And I think that's a real move forward. But once again, it's watering down or diluting that environmental aspect to include the cultural one as well.
Do you think the consumer plays a part in all of this? Do you think that they would make a difference if, so for example, Starbucks weren't doing that? Do you think by me not buying a cup of coffee in a particular venue would make a difference? Do you think the power's shifted?
I think it has. I think some of that's to do with marketing as well. I mean, the message is going out that you need to be sustainable. And I think people are more conscious of who they buy from, what their record is. And it's something I've often said, that it's a move towards doing well by doing good.
Ah, I like that.
And I mean, that's where we get into that whole conversation of what people want. In the UK, there was a big movement a few years ago on chickens.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember.
I do.
And there was a chef, very famous chef in the UK called Hugh Fernley Whittingstall.
Yep.
And he brought a campaign in against cheap chickens in supermarkets. And these were the multi-storey chickens, really, where they were storing them in a barn and they had no quality of life. And we've seen since then the free-range chicken commands much bigger profits than that one. The problem we've got there, though, I don't know if you'd agree with me, is you've got that kind of two-tier system coming with people who can afford the ethically raised chickens against those people on very tight budgets who look towards the cheaper option and have got no other option.
Yeah. Do you think economics plays a part in all of this then?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's the fact of, you know, a premium on sustainable products will lead to some people being excluded from that market. And probably a move in the future, there's got to be some kind of way of equalising those two things, whether it's through regulation. I know we're in an era of trying to reduce regulation, and it's seen, the sustainability agenda is seen as something that will help us to achieve that. I still think there's an element of some regulation required to make sure that standards don't fall to the extent that cheap products mean environmentally and socially damaging practices.
That's interesting. So we kind of look back, we're kind of looking at the now.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the future?
Yes.
Where do we see all of this going?
Well, I suppose we're already seeing it. And I would link it to something like corporate social responsibility, which I think it plays a big part within sustainability. Now, if we think back once again, I keep thinking back, I know, but hopefully I'll go forward on this afterwards. But CSR first started really with companies looking at the benefits of sustainability and actually opening up departments where they organised CSR and corporate other types of responsibility, which they could then use as a marketing tool. I think in recent years, we've seen those departments and those CSR elements going into the boardroom. So it's actually now seen as part of business strategy.
I like that.
And so actually when you're in board meetings now, sustainability has become part of those board meetings, and particularly in terms of reputation.
Yeah.
So I think reputation in the future will begin to drive a lot more. And companies looking, they can't afford some of these publicity, the bad publicity, because they'll soon lose market share. But I do think that's moving in that direction. CEOs and leaders of different organisations are now seeing how they can be more responsible and how that responsibility can actually increase their profits. Going back again, when I first started sustainability, people would say to me, well, why bring all that in? Because it costs money. And I think we're moving now much more towards the fact of bringing in because it actually makes you money rather than costs you money. It's been a long journey, but I think it's beginning to happen now.
That's exciting. We have, obviously, King Charles is an advocate of all of these sustainability agendas and has been for a very, very long time. But moving forwards, do you think companies can afford not to have, so for example, their procurement, their supply chains? How does all of this fit in, do you think, to the future thinking? Well,
I think supply chain's massive. I mean, I think they say it's this kind of central nervous system of the economy in many ways. And too often people are allowed to put in sustainable development characteristics to their own internal processes, but at the same time they're ignoring a lot of their supply chains. And that comes with the territory. I mean, if we think back to the kind of Chicago school economics, that you would minimise your costs as much as you possibly could, which would often mean not taking full account of sustainability indicators.
Yeah.
And you would use that just to maximise your profits at the end. That, we're entering an era now where that would be seen immediately by the market, and the market would respond. And I think that environmentally conscious consumer is also becoming a socially and culturally conscious consumer now.
Do you think we've done a really good part we're both educators, we've worked in education for a long time. Do you think as educators that's part of us? We're starting to see this being what we're teaching and learning through our students. We're starting to see that manifest itself in different ways with the consumers.
And I think, Tracy, we're evolving ourselves in this as well.
Oh, very much.
I mean, you can see our particular journey on that, on having to follow how government policy, consumption choice has changed. And I do really think that part of it that we've found, and I hope you agree with me on this as an educator, is that the problem is that so many things became siloed in terms of sustainability. So we talk about sustainable procurement.
Yeah.
You cannot have sustainable procurement without having all of your organisation communicating on how to do things and how to do those things well.
So ultimately, whose fault do you think all of this is? Because you can't say for one moment that the world is sustainable by any stretch. Yes, we've got the SDGs, got the UN goals. Companies are ticking these boxes, and sometimes, as you said earlier, with the indexes and things, are they ticking boxes just to look good?
Yeah.
But what's next? What can we all do? So not just us sitting here having a chat today. Is there something what advice would you give? What would you suggest?
Well, I suppose my thinking is it's the small things. As a consumer, for example, it's the small things that you look at. How can you make a small difference? And then it's collectively that small difference becomes a big difference globally. I do believe that some of the countries that have been more culpable in terms of emissions, in terms of globalization and actually using that in the wrong ways, should invest more heavily in developing economies and actually making sure that they don't go down the same road that we've gone down at times, and that 20 years or 25 years that I'm talking about becomes 5 to 10 years. I just think it's a kind of collective thing. But it's really difficult when you've got a capitalist system in place, which is almost global now, where profits still seem to drive things. So we need to get to a situation, I suppose, where we all look at what we want.
Yes.
We want the right type of air to breathe. We want our children to have the right conditions to thrive. So that includes education, it includes business development. And if we can get that, we will see a different value, particularly to wealth. Because at the moment, wealth remains something that most of us think about as economic. But quality of life, and the more we think about quality of life, the more we can deliver within our business activities, some of those elements, the more sustainable the world will become, because our values will change.
So it's values driven, not profit driven.
I think the values, I think we've been for too long thinking of the only value being economic profit. So we've seen as anything else being a cost on that value. We're seeing it a little bit probably macro politically at the moment, with that drive back towards, let's make cost savings, let's drive the economy as much as we can, and everything's economy first. But I think particularly the move will be towards trying to reallocate that value in different ways.
So do we all play a part? Not just the CEOs, not just the CSR managers, every one of us? Every
one of us in an organisation plays a role. And I think we're beginning to see now within the successful organisations, there's much more of a platform for people at various levels of organisations to become involved in those things. It's driven the kind of charitable elements of development. So, I've been to companies of late where they've got every 6 months they change the charities that they invest in. It's becoming much less environmental now, and it's become much more social and cultural. And it's trying to push those social and cultural groups into looking after their own environments. And we're here in Sri Lanka at the moment, and you actually think, the whole, the basis of the economy. Since I've been coming here, you've seen another rise in tourist numbers.
Yes.
And when you think here about the economy and the amount of opportunity for the tourist economy, one of the biggest sectors of global economy in terms of tourism is ecotourism. Still one of the biggest growing areas. And you're in a country that can boast within 30 to 40 miles leopards, elephants, whales, and the whole lot together. Yeah. That gives a massive opportunity to the country to develop in those ways. Yet if we just thought of profit first again, we would be destroying the habitat of those animals. And then in the future, local communities wouldn't be able to benefit from their presence.
Absolutely right. And I think as well, you've got to have a balanced approach.
Yeah.
So yes, you'd like the tourists to come in and have that wonderful experience and be advocates for that moving forwards. But equally, we don't want the tourists coming and leaving behind.
No.
As I'm sure you've seen pictures on Everest when the mountain climbers leave Mount Everest and literally bulldozers come in and pick up all the rubbish.
Yeah.
I think
most of that's plastics, as
unfortunately, single use again. Back to what we said earlier.
Yeah.
But it's making sure that if we are going to have that boost, if you like, post-COVID of the tourism sector, it has to be done sustainably.
Yeah.
And it has to be done in a way where everybody benefits, not just one person somewhere's making a profit.
And that's a really good point, because once again, I can go back many years and remember the coining of the phrase, take only photographs, leave only footprints. And I mean, we've been speaking about that for 2 to 3 decades, yet still you talk about Everest and you still talk about some of those areas where they are becoming completely destroyed in parts through either over tourism, too many numbers, or secondly, because people are able to take up and leave so much waste.
So why are we so bad then as humans? We should learn this lesson. Why are we not developing
in a way, sustainability is long term. I still think we're conditioned, if we think politically. There are elections wherever we are every 4 to 5 years. So we only look at those 4 to 5 years. In economics and running businesses, our plans are always for much shorter periods. So anything that falls beyond them is not necessarily a target, but it's something that we could aspire to sometime in the future. And that's really where global warming's crept up on us, or climate change has crept up on us. And I remember a really an episode of The Simpsons, and they were in a museum, the family, and there was a display there of New York, and you could see the Empire State Building, and all of those, and then it was fast-tracked and it showed water just rising to the top.
Oh my gosh.
And there was a kind of banner there saying, this will happen in the next 20 years. And Homer Simpson, I think, looked at his wife and goes, it's all right, we'll be dead by then. And it's that thing of thinking towards the future, but thinking that it's much longer. But as we're seeing, I think last year was the hottest year on record. This year, we've got a change of government in the US, and they're talking about drill, drill, drill. And once again, there's a kind of probably the biggest challenge is probably nationalism in terms of globally of regional economies now, rather than anything else. So drilling is actually a way of reducing imports from elsewhere. So we've just got to probably look towards that global collective and think that everyone has to work together. And if that means that there's an extra role for more money to come from the developed nations who have created most of those emissions, then it's something I think the global community have really got to look at.
It's quite scary when you put it like that. This sort of, are we kind of backward thinking now? So even if it's 4 or 5 years and we have this set agenda, we get to the end of that, that's too short term. We need to be thinking much further into the future for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. If there was one silver bullet that would fix all of our mindsets, that would encourage us all to do one thing, is there any advice you would give anybody?
I think it's just to have a look at, there's always been the fact that science will actually save us from anything and progress, but I think if we were able to look and we had the right kind of media coverage and people were given the same message, that then in Europe, particularly the severity of storms and those kind of things, they're actually costing billions and billions of pounds.
Yeah.
They're costing insurance company untold billions, who are then putting up all of their prices and things. So if we could actually look at how some of those are having such a bad economic effect on us, and there is no silver bullet. The silver bullet is we have to take that collective action. And we have to think, once again, going back to the Brundtland Commission days, we have to look at how we fund and how we manage the planet and businesses, all elements of our lives for future generations.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing that will future generations live in these science fiction like bubbles because you can't go outside because the climate's become that extreme. So it's probably it's a kind of shock doctrine in many ways that the worse things get, the more people will look and say we've got to do something about it. But by then it could be too late. So I think we've reached a period now where we've got to be honest.
Yeah.
And we've got to be honest about climate change. We've got to be honest about weather and honest about how that's going to affect us. And perhaps to go back, the first message is to have a look at how it affects us economically. Because we are still driven as societies by economic growth. And as you've seen, if this inflation goes up, you get demonstrations and people are voting governments out. So we need to think longer term. But we also need to think immediately as well, that we can do that. That commitment is through us as individuals, but obviously as individuals, we kind of are subject to businesses, and businesses operate in our names as societies. So we need to put more pressure on as consumers to say that we will support those companies, those providers who make a difference and aren't just looking to turn a quick profit.
It's interesting. Have you noticed, you travel around the world quite a lot, have you noticed any initiatives in different places that you'd really like to sort of bring back to, and because as I said about the Malta one with the scents, we don't really have anything like that in the UK. And yet it would be perhaps quite simple to introduce. Is there anything that you could sort of share?
Suppose, I travel to India quite regularly and I've been working with some people in India of late on reforestation programs, which are actually looking towards creating, in many ways, community forests again, very much linked to local traditions so that people can become more self-sufficient. I've also, last week or a week before, I was in Trinidad in the Caribbean, and they're a country which have always had a big oil and gas economy, but they're running out of oil and gas now. So they're actually beginning to look at ways in which they can change their environment and change their economic environment as well. So one of the things that they're looking at, and they've seen through all of their investigations, is that Trinidad as a country imports all of its food. So there's a big push now in terms of agricultural development. And that agricultural development's become very much for the home market. So it's not the old IMF idea of investing in agriculture so you can actually derive a profit by exporting, but it's to become self-sufficient in the next 20 years. And that can't happen unless you work with the farmers, unless you work with the producers. And once again, it's kind of lest we forget. So, I go back and I look at the British system and I look at what happened probably throughout the 40s, the 50s, as the big companies became the agricultural producers. And it drove more smaller family type of farms out of business. In Trinidad, they're looking at that and looking to invest in rice farmers, looking to invest in technology to make their lives and their industries more effective, more sustainable. And that's had an education impact as well, because they're actually beginning to teach some of these areas educationally. So I think there are things happening all over. And I think those things that are happening if we can keep that going and we can get enough people to drive that as consumers and say, yes, we will support you if these are the things you're doing, we will support you on there. I think there is a way out, but I think we need to take action now.
Yeah.
And we need to make that action over a much longer term, not just think about political terms or spreadsheets or those things. It's kind of in here.
Yeah.
If we think about the future generations, and it's in here if we think about climate change.
Yeah.
I think it's about communication, Tracy, and I think businesses are beginning to see that. It's not a silo. It's got to be all elements in. People have got to share information in those areas.
Yeah. Oh, it's been fascinating having a chat with you today.
I could have gone on all day. I'm sure you could. It's I find it a fascinating area, and I think we're so lucky to kind of work within that sustainability area of business and management.
Very much so.
So it has been fascinating.
Thank
It's been
you.
really enjoyable as well.
Lovely.
And hopefully it's a real good contribution to the insight dialogue.
I do
here
hope
at
so.
OCB.
Perhaps we'll be asked back for some more, Simon.
I do hope so.
Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Tracy.